Welcome back, everyone, to The Deep Dive. We're diving into a new book today, Internal Uprising, by Wendy Alexander.
Yeah, it's all about Wendy's personal journey through menopause.
So we'll be looking at her experiences and kind of seeing what we can learn from them.
Exactly, sort of distilling her insights into, practical takeaways for all of us.
You know, it's funny. Wendy starts the book with this really powerful analogy, comparing the start of perimenopause to an alien invasion.
It is a vivid analogy, isn't it? I mean, it really captures that sense of sudden, inexplicable changes happening to your body, your mind.
Yeah, like what's going on here?
Yeah, exactly. Wendy was 47 when she started experiencing those classic symptoms, hot flashes, sleeplessness, mood swings.
The joys.
But like so many women, she initially brushed them off.
Oh, totally. It's easy to do, right? Especially when the symptoms are so varied and they can mimic other health issues. Mm-hmm. I think for Wendy, though, there was a real turning point when she started learning about the link between menopause and mental health.
Yeah, there's this really poignant moment in the book where she's talking to a colleague, and he brings up his friend's mother who had tragically taken her own life.
Oh, wow.
And it turned out to be linked to menopausal depression.
Wow, so that was like a real wake-up call for Wendy.
Absolutely. I mean, it made her realize that what she was experiencing wasn't something to just ignore.
Right, like this is serious.
Exactly. It's important to acknowledge the emotional and mental aspects of menopause, not just the physical symptoms.
And it sounds like Wendy really sees these changes as more than just hormonal fluctuations, right?
Yeah.
She even calls it an internal uprising.
Yes. This is where she introduces this idea that those challenging symptoms, they're often a sign of a much deeper internal shift, like something that's demanding our attention.
Right, like listen to me.
Exactly. And she even draws a parallel to the suppression of female intuition historically, like apartheid in South Africa.
Wow, okay.
Any form of suppression, whether it's societal, cultural, or even within ourselves, is going to reach a breaking point. And for many women, menopause can be that breaking point.
Makes sense. And that kind of leads into what Wendy talks about next, with all the societal pressures on women to be nurturers, caretakers, often at the expense of their own needs.
And how that can lead to silencing our own inner voices.
Right, like we're not even allowed to listen to ourselves.
Yeah, and she uses Oprah Winfrey as an example. Even incredibly successful women are still pressured to conform to these expectations.
Yeah, like remember that whole thing about Oprah and being told to lose weight before appearing on the cover of Vogue?
Exactly. It shows how pervasive these societal messages are, even for women who've, made it.
It really makes you think, right? Like how many of us are truly living lives that reflect our authentic selves?
And that's really the core question that Wendy is exploring in this book.
Yeah, and for her, that journey really starts with listening to her body, even when it's screaming at her.
Yeah, even when it's screaming.
Which leads us to the next part of the book. My body is screaming at me to listen. And this is where she gets really honest about her struggles with type 2 diabetes and how it actually worsened with the onset of perimenopause.
It's a crucial point because menopause can significantly impact our physical health. It's not just about hot flashes.
Right. There are real health implications.
Exactly. And it's so important to understand that connection between hormonal changes and our overall well-being.
And I think there's this one moment in the book that really sticks with you, where she describes getting a blood glucose reading of 342.
That's a high number.
Right. It was a huge wake-up call for her, forced her to confront some unhealthy habits and really seek help.
And it leads her to this doctor who emphasizes a more holistic approach, integrating diet changes, emotional work, alongside the traditional medical treatments.
That's interesting, right? So it's like treating the whole person, not just the symptoms.
Exactly. And you know what? He starts her off with something really simple. Deep breathing.
Deep breathing.
Yeah.
I mean, I could see how that would help with stress, anxiety. But how does it connect to those deeper internal shifts Wendy's talking about?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. And Wendy explores this in the next section, When Did I Lose My Voice? She starts experimenting with different techniques like yoni breathing and meditation.
Okay, for those of us who are not familiar with these practices, can you give us a little rundown of what they involve and, how they connect to Wendy's journey?
Sure. So yoni breathing is a practice focused on connecting with feminine energy, cultivating a sense of embodiment, and it involves specific breathing techniques and visualizations. And meditation, of course, is about quieting the mind and connecting with a deeper sense of awareness.
Okay, so how did these practices actually help Wendy?
It wasn't easy for her at first. She had to confront some uncomfortable truths about her lifestyle, her choices. But the more she connected with her body and emotions through breathwork and meditation, the more in tune she became with her own inner wisdom.
It's like she was finally able to hear her own voice again.
Exactly. It was like clearing the static. And it makes sense, right? Tuning into our bodies, quieting that mental chatter, it can really help us tap into that deeper wisdom.
Yeah, I get that. But, it's easier said than done, especially in our world today, right? Everything's so fast-paced, constantly connected.
Absolutely. Wendy talks about the challenges of, carving out time for these practices and the resistance she initially felt. But she also emphasizes the profound benefits, particularly during menopause when we're going through such intense physical and emotional shifts.
Yeah, it sounds like these practices are not just about relaxation, but about reclaiming a sense of agency.
Exactly. Yeah. Connecting with a deeper sense of self.
So it's not just about what we're thinking and feeling, but also what we're putting into our bodies.
That's a great point, and it leads perfectly into the next section of the book, Owning Up to the Truth, where Wendy gets really honest about her diet and how she started making some big changes under her doctor's guidance.
Like what kind of changes are we talking about?
Well, she had to really pay attention to what she was eating and figure out which foods were aggravating her menopausal symptoms and which ones were supporting her overall well-being.
Okay, that makes sense. Were there any specific things she cut out or added in?
For Wendy, reducing sugar, alcohol, and spicy foods made a big difference.
Yeah, those are pretty common triggers for a lot of people, especially during menopause.
And on the flip side, she found that incorporating things like avocados, legumes, and grains cooked on low heat to retain their enzymes were really helpful. She also talks about spices like cumin and cinnamon.
It's like she's combining this modern nutritional knowledge with an understanding of food energetics, right?
Exactly. She even did a 3-day detox program.
Wow, committed.
I know, right? It wasn't about deprivation, but really just gaining a deeper understanding of the connection between food and her overall well-being, how her body was responding to different things.
That's so interesting. It's like food as medicine, using it to support our bodies during this transition.
Exactly. And it's not just about what we consume, but also about creating space for stillness and rest.
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue into the next part of Wendy's journey, the section titled, I Crave Silence. And she talks about this need for rest and solitude, something she initially resisted.
Right. She struggled with societal expectations, and her own doer mentality. Like so many women, she felt this pressure to be constantly productive and always putting everyone else's needs before her own. It's so easy to fall into that trap.
It is. But Wendy realized that prioritizing self-care and setting boundaries, even with loved ones, was absolutely essential for her well-being.
Easier said than done, though, right? We're so programmed to be on all the time that just resting can feel, almost like a radical act.
It can. There's this one part where she talks about a spa day she went on.
Oh, nice.
Where she finally allowed herself to just fully detach from the demands of her life. And she realized how much she craved that silence and solitude.
So it was a real turning point for her, learning to prioritize her own needs.
It was. And it sounds like she's really starting to piece together a life that's more in alignment with her true self. And in the next section, Writing to Survive, we see her rediscovering this passion that had been dormant for years, writing.
So she's finding her voice again in a different way.
Exactly. And she describes this incredible feeling of fulfillment she gets while writing, this realization that words are her true calling.
It's a theme that resonates with so many people, especially during midlife. We start to question our purpose, our passions, what really matters to us. Did Wendy talk about how she balanced writing with her corporate job and all her other responsibilities?
Oh, absolutely. She talks about carving out pockets of time for writing, even amidst, the chaos of perimenopause and a demanding job. It wasn't always easy, but she made it a priority.
That's inspiring to see her taking these concrete steps towards a life that feels more authentic and fulfilling.
Mm-hmm. It reminds us that even small actions can create big shifts, especially when we're consistent.
So true. So are you ready to move on to the next section?
I am. It gets even more interesting. Wendy starts tapping into what she calls the mother energy.
Okay, mother energy. Tell me more.
She describes it as this force of nurturing, tenacity, and seeing things through to fruition.
Oh, I like that. So it's about recognizing that we have these inner resources that can help us navigate challenges and achieve our goals.
Exactly. And for Wendy, this newfound connection with her mother energy helps her not only with her writing, but also with other aspects of her life as well.
So it's about harnessing that strength that lies within. It's incredible to see how Wendy's journey is unfolding, right? She's going through this intense internal process. And at the same time, she's finding ways to express herself and create a life that feels more aligned with her true self.
It is. It's inspiring. And in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to explore how Wendy embraces the concept of aging as a woman.
Okay.
And what it means to step into her power as a leading lady in her own life.
I'm intrigued. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more of the deep dive.
Sounds good. All right, so we're back and ready to dive deeper into Wendy's journey. And we're going to see how she really starts to challenge societal norms around aging.
Okay, sorry. In
the section, The Innate Knowing of the Evergreen Feminine Soul, she finds inspiration in a really unexpected place. A line from an Ed Sheeran song.
Ed Sheeran, huh? I wouldn't necessarily associate him with the complexities of menopause.
Right, but there's this lyric, loving you was evergreen, and it's that word evergreen that really sparks something for Wendy.
Okay, I'm curious. What does she make of that?
She starts thinking about trees, how they grow more magnificent with age, their strength, their beauty. And she contrasts this with cultures like Okinawa, where elders are revered for their wisdom, and they remain active members of their communities, well into their later years.
So it's like she's challenging that whole idea that youth equals beauty and value.
Exactly. It's about shifting our perspective and seeing aging as a natural, even a beautiful part of life, not just decline.
It's a powerful image and a much-needed message. So how does Wendy apply this evergreen philosophy to her own life?
She starts to embrace this idea of women as leading ladies, like in the section, Becoming a Leading Lady.
Okay, leading ladies. I like it.
She really encourages women to step into their power, pursue their passions, regardless of their age.
It's about saying we get to define what aging gracefully and powerfully looks like.
Exactly. And it's not about conforming to some specific mold or achieving some arbitrary standard of success, but about recognizing those unique strengths and wisdom that we accumulate over time.
I love that. So it's about using that wisdom, those strengths, to create a life that feels authentic and fulfilling.
Yes. And she actually references that iconic scene from the movie The Holiday. Remember when Kate Winslet's character tells Cameron Diaz, "You're supposed to be the leading lady of your own life, for God's sake"?
Oh, I love that movie. Such a classic.
It is. And Wendy uses that scene as a jumping off point to explore what it means to be a leading lady in the context of, midlife and beyond.
Right, because it's not just about pursuing passions, right? There's also this element of like gumption,
right.
The courage, determination to navigate life's challenges.
Absolutely. And for Wendy, a big part of that involves speaking up, being vulnerable, and having those honest conversations with other women about their experiences.
Okay, so that's covered in the section, speaking vulnerably and courageously. And she starts with her own mother.
She does. And it's all about breaking down those taboos, right? Creating spaces where women can share their experiences without shame or judgment.
Such an important message. So did Wendy talk about, any specific insights that came from those conversations?
What she found was that by sharing her story, by having these open conversations, she realized that so many other women were going through similar challenges. And that sense of connection was incredibly empowering.
It's like vulnerability becomes a source of strength, not weakness.
Exactly. And she gives an example of being in the hospital and having to advocate for her own needs.
Oh, that's interesting. What happened?
She was experiencing severe pain, but her doctor kind of dismissed her concerns. But instead of just accepting that, she spoke up, articulated her symptoms, insisted on further testing.
Good for her.
And it turned out she had a serious medical condition that needed immediate attention.
Wow. So speaking her truth literally saved her life.
It did. And it just shows how reclaiming our voices, even in those situations where we might feel powerless, can be so crucial.
Absolutely. It's about trusting our intuition and standing up for our well-being. So it sounds like Wendy's really starting to step into her power. But I'm sure this journey wasn't always smooth sailing, right? There had to be some setbacks along the way.
Oh, for sure. In Screaming Through the Fire, she talks about how dealing with grief and loss really triggered some old patterns for her and eventually led to a breaking point in her career.
Grief can be so disorienting, and it often brings up all these unresolved emotions and past traumas. So what happened to Wendy?
She lost her aunt and then her uncle within a short period of time. And while she was dealing with this grief, she took on a super demanding new job with a bank. And instead of allowing herself to grieve, to process everything, she pushed herself to keep performing.
I think so many of us can relate to that, like that tendency to just power through difficult emotions, especially in the workplace. You got to maintain that facade of strength and competence.
Right. But for Wendy, It was unsustainable. And it eventually led to a breaking point.
What was the breaking point?
So, picture this. She's at her uncle's funeral, and her boss keeps texting her with these urgent work requests, like completely oblivious to the fact that she's grieving.
Wow, that's awful.
It was the last straw for her. She realized she couldn't keep sacrificing her well-being for this job that didn't value her, as a person.
What did she do?
She quit.
She quit, just like that.
Yeah, it was this radical act of self-care, a declaration of her worth,
Wow, that's powerful.
It was. She realized her mental and emotional health were more important than any job.
So it's a reminder that we have choices.
Yeah.
Even when it feels like we don't.
And that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is walk away from what's no longer serving us. And that's exactly what she did.
So she quits her job. What's next for Wendy?
Well, she makes another bold decision. She decides to move to New York City.
New York, wow. With her daughter.
Yeah. Her daughter had dreams of working in fashion, and Wendy had promised to support her. But it was also about embracing this new adventure, stepping outside her comfort zone.
I love that she's going for it. So how was her experience in New York?
Transformative, truly transformative. In New York City Adventures, she describes the city's energy as this catalyst for creativity, personal growth. She talks about living a simpler life, finding inspiration in everyday moments, and writing more than ever before. It's like the city itself became a mirror for her own internal transformation.
Oh, I love that imagery. She finds this place that matches her energy and helps her, shed those old layers that weren't serving her.
Exactly. And she shares all these little moments, like seeing impromptu dance performances on the subway that highlight the city's unique character. She starts embracing spontaneity and joy.
That's beautiful. But even with all the excitement, I'm guessing there were still moments of self-doubt, right?
Oh, absolutely. Even in New York, Wendy's still grappling with her inner critic.
Yeah, makes sense. It's a constant battle for many of us.
It is. In the section When the Inner Critic Shouts Louder, she talks about this ongoing process of learning to quiet that voice and replace it with self-compassion.
Right, because that negative self-talk can be so insidious.
It can. And she finds inspiration in a book she read by Don Miguel Ruiz, The 4 Agreements. Have you read it?
4 Agreements.
Oh,
it's full of wisdom.
Right. And one of the agreements, always do your best, really sparked some major epiphany for Wendy.
What was it?
She realized that, throughout her life, she had been doing her best, even when she didn't recognize it.
Oh, I see. She was so focused on being perfect that she couldn't even acknowledge her own efforts and progress.
Exactly. It's about shifting from self-judgment to self-acceptance.
Huge. So did she talk about how she put this into practice?
She made a conscious effort to replace that inner critic with self-compassion. So anytime those negative thoughts would creep in, she would just remind herself, I'm doing my best, and that's enough.
So simple, yet so profound.
Right. It's about giving ourselves grace, recognizing that we're all works in progress.
Love it. And this new perspective gives her even more strength to advocate for herself. Like she talks about this one time when she had a health crisis, landed her in the ICU. Yeah. And her doctor told her she couldn't travel overseas. She had a wedding and a long-planned European trip coming up.
So what does she do?
Well, this time she didn't back down. She explained how important this trip was for her well-being, and she asked her doctor to trust her judgment.
Wow.
And guess what? He listened. He signed off on her travel plans.
That's amazing. It's a real testament to her self-advocacy. So what happened on this European adventure?
Well, it's beautifully described in A Softer Roar. She and her daughter traveled for weeks, exploring cities, immersing themselves in different cultures.
Sounds amazing.
Right. And they really let their intuition guide them. It's this beautiful celebration of freedom, self-discovery.
Wow. Were there any particularly memorable moments from the trip?
There was this really powerful moment in Scotland. She visits the Three Sisters Mountains. Remember we talked about those earlier?
Yes, the mountains connected to the Celtic goddess Brigid.
Exactly. And those 3 peaks, they represent Brigid's mastery of healing, poetry, and smithing. Wendy felt a really strong connection to their symbolism, seeing her own journey reflected in those mountains.
I can only imagine what it must have felt like to stand there.
Right. And as she's standing there, she declares this personal mantra, affirming her identity as a writer, a woman who speaks her truth, this quiet but powerful moment of self-affirmation.
Chills. So it sounds like she's really come full circle in her journey.
She has, in a way. And in the final section, A Softer Roar, she reflects on how this journey has changed her and what she's learned about embracing the power of the evergreen feminine soul.
Okay, I'm ready for the grand finale. What are some of the key takeaways she shares?
She talks a lot about learning to listen to her intuition, of really prioritizing her well-being and trusting her inner voice, making choices that honor her needs.
It's a theme that runs throughout the whole book, like finding that inner compass and actually following it.
Exactly. And she also emphasizes that true strength doesn't always require a loud roar. She uses the analogy of a lioness.
Oh, I like that.
Right. The lioness is a powerful hunter, a protector, but she doesn't need to roar as loudly as the male lion to get her point across.
So it's about recognizing that quiet strength and wisdom can be just as effective, sometimes even more so.
Yes. And she leaves us with this powerful message about speaking up, whether it's through a whisper or a shout, to create change in our lives and in the world around us.
And she also talks about these really fascinating techniques like Tumo yoga. Have you heard of that?
Tumo yoga. I'm not really familiar with that.
It's discussed in the section Screaming Through the Fire, and it's pretty wild.
Okay, tell me more.
Tumo, also known as inner heat yoga, it's practiced by Tibetan monks, and they can generate this incredible body heat even in like freezing conditions.
I've heard of like monks meditating in the snow. Is that what you're talking about?
Exactly. They use visualizations, breath work, and intense focus to channel this energy.
Okay, but how does this connect to menopause? I'm not seeing the link.
Well, Wendy makes this really fascinating connection. She suggests that the intense energy of hot flashes, it can be harnessed in a similar way to how these monks practice Tumo. It's like reframing our perspective on hot flashes, seeing them not as something to, dread, but as a way to kind of burn away negative thoughts, beliefs.
So instead of fighting the hot flash, you lean into it. You use that energy for personal transformation.
Yeah, exactly. It's really empowering. And it's a great example of, her overall message, which is transforming challenges into opportunities for growth.
That's a great point.
And she doesn't just talk about this stuff in the abstract. She gives us concrete examples of how she did it in her own life.
Oh, right, like in Scotland when she was at the Three Sisters Mountains.
Exactly. That moment where she declares her personal mantra is just so powerful. It really highlights the importance of ritual and symbolism in, marking these transitions, claiming our intentions.
And it's not just about those grand gestures, right? It's about the everyday ways we speak our truth, whether it's setting boundaries, advocating for our needs, or just expressing ourselves authentically.
Absolutely. It's recognizing that our voices matter and that we have the right to be heard. And, sometimes speaking our truth can be as simple as choosing silence and solitude.
Right, like she was talking about in I Crave Silence. It's like self-care isn't selfish, it's essential.
Totally. And it's in those quiet moments that we can really hear that inner wisdom.
This has been such an insightful deep dive. Wendy's story is so relatable, inspiring. It really makes you realize that menopause isn't just about physical changes. It's about this profound shift in identity.
It is. And, it's a chance to reclaim your power.
Absolutely.
And what I love about her book is it's like a tapestry woven with personal anecdotes, ancient wisdom, pop culture references, and her own unique insights.
It's true. She brings it all together.
It's not just a self-help book. It's a memoir, a guide, a conversation starter. And she does it all with this blend of vulnerability and strength. It's incredible.
Inspiring, for sure. It's like she's saying, hey, this is hard, but we can do hard things. We don't have to do them alone.
That's it. She gives us permission to embrace those messy, imperfect journeys.
And reminds us that menopause can be this time of great creativity, transformation.
Yeah, she discovers her passion for writing, travels the world, finds her voice. It's never too late.
This deep dive has been so illuminating. Wendy's journey is a powerful reminder that menopause isn't an ending, it's a beginning.
It is.
A chance to reclaim our voices, embrace wisdom, and create a life that feels authentic and fulfilling.
And step into our power, honor our bodies, celebrate the gifts that come with aging.
If you're navigating midlife and menopause or know someone who is, I highly recommend checking out Internal Uprising.
Wendy's story will resonate, I think.
Definitely. And let us know what you think. What stood out to you from Wendy's story? What resonated with you personally?
Join the conversation.
We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time.
Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep living your truth.